Dperry is the former editor of the Associated Press in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. He's also the publisher of Ask Questions Later on Substack. Dan, you're joining us from Tel Aviv. I could see earlier you were listening in to the whole show. I appreciate your patience. Thank you very much. The last time that Benjamin Netanyahu had a deal with Hamas, it was earlier this year, started in January, and he broke it in March after about a month and a half. Can he be trusted this time to stick to this deal?
It's a great question, because you're right, he did violate the previous deal. I don't know if I would ever argue for trusting anyone, least of all Netanyahu, but the circumstances are very different. For one thing, he violated that previous deal with the full permission of Donald Trump, who at that point was fantasizing about a full removal of the Gaza population and a building of a Riviera by the U.S. that would own and run Gaza. So that was a whole different time from what we currently see with Trump, the current version of Trump, seeking Nobel Prizes and speaking of Middle East peace. So I don't think he'll so easily get U.S. permission to do that. The second difference is that the political calculus has changed for Netanyahu, because whereas in the past, an end to the war under circumstances that would leave Hamas in any way in power were problematic for him with his coalition. The far right of the coalition would have probably brought him down, and that mattered to him. It's a ridiculous way of behaving, but most people in Israel think he's not beyond making that a calculation. So sure, there was that. Now, elections are looming in Israel, possibly within months. The war is unpopular. So the previous electoral, or rather political need to maintain a coalition is now replaced by an electoral need to pacify the Israeli public, among whom the war has been very unpopular for a long, long time. I watch international TV and I hear the Israeli public's position largely misrepresented, like they all wanted the Gazans to be expelled. Not true. No matter what distorted polls you see, most of the people in Israel wanted the war to be over. Last but not least, and this is critical, Hamas has now accepted, in theory accepted, the 20-point plan that includes their disarming, at least in Gaza. That was not the case before. That achieves a fundamental Israeli war aim that most Israelis do support. And it would be almost politically impossible for Netanyahu to walk away from a deal that achieves that one thing. Now, of course, they haven't really accepted it. It kind of looks like they did. The Arab League did. Qatar is pressing for it. If Hamas does not, in the end, walk away from that aspect of the 20-point plan, and that's an open question to me, if they really did accept the entire plan, then I don't think Netanyahu can walk away from it. Trump wouldn't let him, if nothing else, but neither would the Israeli people, who, as I say, will have their say soon enough. If it turns out that somehow Hamas has not accepted that aspect of the 20-point plan, then yeah, I think we're looking at a pretty decent possibility of outrage in Israel, a scaling up of the war to cataclysmic proportions with the full support of Trump. I kind of think some fudge is more likely than that. And the fudge I foresee is that Hamas will indeed agree to lay down their arms in Gaza, but not elsewhere. And somehow, maybe from there, lies an optimal path forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, at this point, nobody's wrong by saying that so much about this deal is unknown, right? We can't predict the future. The agreement is on the first part of the deal, and we don't actually know, as you point out, what happens after that first part of the deal, which is really pretty narrow. You mentioned Netanyahu's changing political calculus. I was hoping you could give us a little bit more about that. It's true elections are supposed to happen next year. If it's early next year, as you said, it's a few months from now. So what are his political incentives at this point and disincentives?
His major incentive is to end the war on terms that will be acceptable to the Israelis. Now, the return of the hostages and a disarming of Hamas and the replacing of Hamas with this complex edifice of local technocrats, Palestinian Authority in waiting maybe, but with reforms that most Israelis want, especially to the educational curriculum. Some sort of pan-Arab force, maybe on a perimeter, can't hurt from the Israelis' perspective because they don't really trust the Palestinians to handle their affairs reasonably. And moreover, an international oversight committee chaired by Donald Trump, who's lionized in Israel. This is a very decent outcome from Israel's perspective to the war, putting aside the tremendous cost that the Israelis know, direct and indirect upon them as well, but also the damage to Gaza is not something that Israelis are happy to have been, from their perspective, forced to do. So bottom line, the war will have ended okay if the 20-point plan is respected from the Israeli public's perspective, somehow. But if Netanyahu can leverage this with Trump's help to achieve other political or diplomatic outcomes like normalization or some version of it with Saudi Arabia, maybe accommodations with Syria and Lebanon, both of which will have been made possible by Israel's weakening of Hezbollah and Iran during the war. Netanyahu can flip the script, because currently the outrage over his scandalous incompetence and strategic breakdown of October 7th, before, during, and even after, combined with just the misery of the war, has him rather unpopular. He has an advantage, which is the sort of rock solid and lockdown support of somewhere between a third and 40% that back him. The opposition is somewhat fractured in a way, so there's always a possibility he can tempt a few others over and cobble together a majority, but not so likely right now, given what we know right now. But he's a great politician. As I say, if the Trump plan really is implemented, including the disarming of Hamas in Gaza, and he gets other carrots from Saudi Arabia or elsewhere, and then he can point to the aforementioned successes, in particular regarding Iran, and that was a success, without a shadow of a doubt, then who knows? Maybe it's not inconceivable that he again squeaks through. Remember, the 2022 election was basically a tied election. Opposition splits gave him a few extra percent, but he's not that popular. But he's a great politician, so you can never rule him out.
Dan Perry, coming to us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you, sir.